Hello everyone, welcome to Graphics Design 101. On your journey to graphic designing, it's important that you understand the basics of graphics designing, particularly the fundamentals. And that is why in this class, I'm going to be teaching you what you need to understand just before you get your hands on your designing tool. And that would mean that we need to essentially dive in on the basics of graphics designing. All right, so the first thing you want to understand here is creative design. Now, I want you to follow me carefully because I'm going to highlight a couple of things here. And even though we have everything here very elaborate, it's important that you take note of the very specific things that I'm going to be pointing out. Now, I want you to understand very carefully. Um, the creative space or the creative process is all about coming up with a result that is totally new or taking something that is already established and reinventing it in a new way. So, what I just did for you was I just defined what creative designing is. Now, creative designing is your ability to conceptualize what it is that already exists, particularly into a new way. Now, it's possible that you already have some type of idea, it's possible that you already have some type of imagination, right? But your ability to redesign or bring it to life, right, is what we call creative design. Now, I want you to understand that this goes beyond your expert knowledge on Photoshop or InDesign. It's your internal ability to come up with something new, a new way or a new invention in general. I want you to also understand that creating the digital picture of the solution is separate from the process. This is so important because this is the first part before you get on your tool. Have it at the back of your mind that in order for you to become an exceptional designer, it does not make, in order for you to become an exceptional designer, you have to first have a creative mind before you talk about the tool that you're using. So your ability to use tools very well is actually grounded on how creative your mind can be. And of course, that is subject to a lot of things, all right, particularly exposure. Now, I'm going to dive into this course, and I want you to understand that this is an in depth understanding on graphics designing, particularly the fundamentals. Now, what is design? Now, this is so important, this is so vital. The creation of a plan or convention for the construction of an object, system, or measurable human interaction, as in an architectural blueprint, engineering drawing, business process circuit diagram, or sewing machine, or sewing pattern. Now, what this is saying essentially is anything that looks like a blueprint, anything that looks like a some type of now in terms of blueprint, you understand that before before a house is built, there's some form of blueprint that shows what the house would look like, you know. So in essence, what I'm basically saying here is that a design is the creation of a plan, is the creation of a plan or convention for the construction of an object. This is so important for you to understand that the design is not just relegated to graphics designing. There are different types of design. It could be in diagram form, it could be in patterns, it could be in business processes where you have your bar chart, pie chart. You see, a design largely is used for communication, and we're going to get into that shortly. All right. Now, what is graphic design? Now, the process of visual communication and the problem solving using one or more typography, photography, and illustration. It is also the creation and the combination of symbols, images, text to form a visual representation of ideas and messages. Everything I just said right now, the summary of what it is, graphics designing is your ability to communicate with images, text, visual representation, ideas. If you're unable to communicate with your graphics or what you're working on, it's safe to say that you're not designing, because what makes a successful design is when the design is able to communicate. So, for example, you have a wedding coming up, and what you want to do is essentially tell people around that I have a wedding, please come to my wedding. I can't wait to see you at my wedding. But the question is, how do you communicate to, maybe if your guest list is 200, how do you communicate to 200 individuals? The easiest way is to have some form of graphics design that can easily communicate that for you. So instead of repeating yourself to 200 people, that graphics design is repeating itself to 200 people. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that communicates some level of clarity. Now, The graphics design toolbox is something that you must understand, and I want you to listen to me very clearly. Graphic design is the physical process of building or modifying something visual. It is something that quickly or is something that requires great skill to do well and even greater skill to do quickly. Graphics design process, however, is a functional one. It is similar to manufacturing in some ways. It's producing the image, it is the producing of the image. This is where the software, keyboard, the mouse are used as construction tools. And though it may sound glamorous, it takes a lot of time and dedication to become good at it. Now, I want you to understand this. The process of doing graphics designing or modifying some type of or something visual, it's something that requires great skill to do. Now, it's important for you to understand that when you're stepping into the space of graphics designing, it would require some level of repetition for you to be consistently good at it. Now, it also requires some level of commitment to be good at it at a quicker and a faster pace. So that would simply mean that it's not just about saying, oh, I have an idea. It's a function of, like what I said earlier on, some form of exposure, some form of, and exposure is not just relative to what you know. It's relative. It's important to understand that exposure is also attached to what your eyes consistently see, what your eyes interpret as an excellent design. This would mean that you have to consistently expose your mind, expose your eyes to fantastic designs, not just even designs that you're seeing from platforms that harbor creative designs, joining communities where you have individuals that are extremely creative, having maybe individuals that you want to call mentors that have gone far in this space. And this will largely help you to become powerful and functional with the toolbox. Now, the toolbox essentially is talking about the tools you're going to be using. All right, so if you want to talk about, and there are various tools from Photoshop to InDesign to Illustrator to Canva, whatever platform you're using, your ability to be able to communicate via design, you would eventually, of course, have to use this platform. But I'm just let you know that your creative process is very important. All right. Now, just a couple of things I want to also express and stress here. Creative and graphic designing. Now, it's important for you to understand that when it comes to graphic designing and creating, now let me help you to differentiate them now. In the marketing industry, the words creative and graphic design are usually used interchangeably. Unfortunately, the ideas are, also sometimes used interchangeably, but both often refers to the development of images, but both are concepts. One person can deliver. Both are admirable, but one is a skill and the other is a process. Now, one is a skill and the other is a process. Distinguishing which can save you time, money, and great frustration. And we're going to be differentiating them as we move in. Creative design. Creative design is your ability to answer questions even before your ability to answer questions before the user even is asking the question. Design places the user in control of their experience and gives them what they want from the product effortlessly. With many products offering the same service in a crowded market, design is what allows one product to stand out from the other. Let me say this to you. Your product can be good, but if the design is bad, it would not communicate integrity, value to the client or the customer. So you can have a good product, but you can have a bad communication in terms of your design. You can have a bad product, and if you have a good design, you'll be able to sell effectively. So while we note this, let's look at some fundamentals in design, and this is one of the major areas I want you to focus on. Now, in designing, we have 6 major components or 6 major elements that is you cannot do without these elements. We have line, shape, space, color, form, and texture. Now, what is a line? Now, your line is essentially, and I don't need to overemphasize this. You use your lines. They can either be thick, they can either be slim, they can either be solid, they can either be dashed. All right, when you have a straight line, or you want to have a curved line, you want to have dotted lines, you want to have them in there. So essentially, you use your lines and use your lines for a lot of things. You can use your lines to demarcate You can use your lines to demarcate sections in between your diagram or your framework. You can use lines to be able to have segments. Lines are so useful in many and multiple ways. Now, I want to stress this because it's so important. This bit you're looking at on my screen is color. Now, listen, color is one of the most important elements in design, and I'm telling you, it's one of the most obvious. All right, for both the user and the designer, it can stand alone as a background, and it can be applied on the elements that I mentioned before. And the elements I mentioned before include lines, shape, text, typography. Essentially, I want you to understand that colors, they create a mood. Colors create a mood. Now, if I say love, what comes to your mind? You're thinking love, you're thinking red, you're thinking pink, you're thinking anything around the love space. If I say royalty, you're thinking purple, you're thinking royal colors. If I say danger, you're thinking red as well. So essentially, you have the ability to create moods with color. This is why the power of the power of graphic design rather, is so is one that you cannot sweep under the carpet. It's so important, particularly if you're into communications. You have the ability and the power to create moods. And the next thing I want to talk about is shape. Now, you have different types of shapes. You have circular shapes, which is categorized into geometric shapes, and you have a bit of abstract shapes, which is categorized into organic shapes. Now, when we start the practicals, you eventually get to understand what I'm talking about. Now, we also have forms. Now, in designing, there are different types of forms, and I know by now you must have probably heard them. And form is described to as any 3D dimension object. Sometimes it can be 2D. Essentially, whatever form it is you're working on, it can be measured by height, width, or depth. Now, space. Now, this is so important. As a matter of fact, the document you're looking at right now is an embodiment of what I'm talking about. Now, space refers to the area that a shape or form occupies. Space can be defined as a positive or negative. Space can also be defined as the space of a shape representing a subject. Now, we have positive and negative shape. Now, positive shape, I'm said, refers to the space of a shape representing a subject. Now, if you look over here, you understand that what you're seeing here is representing the subject. It is what you're seeing is representing the subject within my space. Now, when you're looking at negative space refers to the space around and in between the subject, around and in between the subject. So I can have the subject, the space that is around the subject. If I have a picture here, the space that is around the picture. All right. And then for the other one, which is positive, positive refers to the space of a shape represented or representing the object, which is the opposite. All right. And the next one we want to talk about is texture. Now, look, we already understand texture. There are different types of textures when it comes to designing. Now, texture is the perceived surface quality of work of art. It is distinguished by the perceived visual or physical properties. They could be environmental, biological, or man-made. But in context to design, it's possible for you to be designing and you say, you know what, I want to have a wooden background in my design. I want to have a glossy feel. I want to have, you want to have a hairy touch to your design. You see, it's a form, you have the ability to give texture to your design, and that's essentially what's talking about here. Now, we talked about the elements, now we're talking about the principles. Now, in context to principles, you have balance, you have repetition, you have dominance, you have contrast, you have rhythm, and you have proportion.